So I'm just going to kick us off since we kind of did quite an icebreaker this morning already. And I'm going to introduce the next speaker, who is Kenneth Martin. So Kenneth is an enrolled member of the Bad River Band of the Lake Superior Chippewa Indians, which is located in what is now present-day Wisconsin, but he actually grew up on the Menominee Reservation where his mother was enrolled. He is a descendant of Menominee. He is also a descendant of the Oneida Nation of Wisconsin. He spent more than 18 years working in the United States Senate for 4 different senators and 2 Senate committees. He has also previously served as the first ever Deputy Assistant Secretary for Tribal Government Affairs at the U.S. Department of Transportation under the Obama administration. He now serves as the U.S. EPA Director of the American Indian Environmental Office. We can give a round of applause for Kenneth Martin, and thank you for joining us. Yep.
Morning. Good morning. Good morning. Good morning, everyone. How's everyone doing this morning? All right. I hope you've had your caffeine. I made a joke. I spoke a couple weeks ago at AT&I, the climate conference they were having, and I wanted to just make sure that everyone's had their caffeine this morning and is completely ready for this government speech that I'm about to give. Thank you. Thank you. Well, welcome to the third day and final day. I get the pleasure of being the last keynote speaker, and I'm glad you're all here to make it this morning. It's been a pleasure for me. You know, it always is a pleasure for me to come out and meet individually and meet face to face with tribes and tribal leaders and tribal program directors and staff, because it's so much more important to me to have that personal connection than sitting in a room, in a conference room or an office in Washington, D.C. So thank you for having me here. It's been so great to meet so many new people and to see old friends. So thank you for that. I won't go over my bio again, which thank you very much, Heather, for describing all of that for me. So I won't have to. I would like to thank the Grand Ronde Tribe for hosting us this week. I am now an investor after my couple days in the casino. So you're welcome for that. I'd also like to thank the Region 10 RTOC members and staff. I know how difficult it is to put together these conferences, and I will say that this has been amazing. It's appeared flawless, and I know being stressed out, putting these together, you're not thinking it's flawless, but it's been a great week. So thank you to the staff and to all of the members of the RTOC here in Region 10. And I'd also like to thank the Region 10 EPA staff for being here. Your presence just, shows that commitment to the federal tribal partnership that we share. So having Region 10 here, EPA staff is just, it's great. I began as I began as the director of the American Indian Environmental Office just over a year ago. The first trip that I made into Indian country was to the Region 10 Tribal Environmental Leaders Summit last year, which was held in Fort Hall, Idaho. So it's been 1 year. This is my second time back at the TELS, and it just feels almost like a homecoming for me, because I to just be able to see so many friends that welcomed me a year ago, and were so welcoming to me back here this week. So thank you for that. I really do appreciate it. It's been quite a year. We've made some gains on some things. We have hit some roadblocks on things. We've made a little bit of waves with some other things. But I know that we're all moving the ball forward, and that is the goal. It's our shared goal, is to make progress and to move the ball forward to ensure that we are making progress toward better environmental stewardship, environmental protection, and protecting the public health. I'd like to outline some of the things that EPA has been working on, my office and all of EPA. Priorities that include prioritization of direct partnerships with tribes and elevating tribal feedback through our work with the National Tribal Caucus, the use of and protection of Indigenous knowledge and honoring tribal data sovereignty, coordinating with our other federal agencies to facilitate tribal capacity building through leadership and partnership within the White House Council on Native American Affairs, and implementing Executive Order 14112, reforming federal funding and support for tribal nations to better embrace our trust responsibilities and promote the next era of tribal self-determination. I hope you join me in my confidence this work can make dramatic strides in improving tribal environmental stewardship and capacity building from today and into the future. First, I would like to discuss something regarding the EPA and its tribal relationship. Strengthening EPA's tribal partnerships has been and will continue to be one of my top priorities while I am in this role. We all share our sincere desire to improve environment and public health in Indian country. A main driver for this work is EPA's coordination with tribes and the network of tribal advisory groups and partnership groups that we have. These tribal advisory groups work closely and successfully with EPA's headquarters and regional offices to identify and discuss priority issues to ensure that EPA's actions are informed by tribal input. One example of this partnership is through the successful working ship that the Region 10 RTOC has with EPA Region 10, which has clearly been visible this week at the summit. My office, the American Indian Environmental Office, also works closely with the National Tribal Caucus, the tribal advisory group that works with the RTOCs, the tribal partnership groups to convey recommendations for implementing environmental programs in Indian country to EPA senior leadership. We recently announced a proposed reorganization of the NTC to a federal advisory committee authorized under the Federal Advisory Committee Act. This proposal aims to ensure that tribal leaders engage at the highest levels of the agency on the issues that matter to them most. It also aims to strengthen the connection between the National Tribal Caucus, the tribal partnership groups, including the RTOCs. Last month, EPA initiated a 60-day consultation period on the review and elements of the National Tribal Caucus, including membership, structure, and mission. I'd like to acknowledge that Region 10 did submit a request for an additional 60-day extension on the 60-day consultation period, and I'm happy to say that earlier this week, we were able to grant that extension. So instead of a 60-day consultation, we will be having a 120-day consultation period on the proposed changes to the NTC. I understand that this is of great interest to everyone, not just the RTOCs, but the tribal partnership groups, the NTOC itself, and EPA as well. So I think the national consultation and coordination period will allow for all interested tribes, tribal environmental programs, and tribal parties to provide their input and consideration of this proposal. I would like to reiterate that it is just a proposal. Our goal is to examine ways to maximize the manner in which we exchange information that will meet both our federal and our tribal needs. I do think we're on a path to have a great discussion on the ways that we can improve and strengthen our federal tribal partnership, and I welcome everyone's thoughts. And I look forward to the discussion and the conversation on this issue. EPA looks forward to all input that may be provided during the consultation and coordination process. I started with the partnership groups and the National Tribal Caucus because I wanted to highlight how important they are. And especially in this region, those partnerships are so vital. Vice Chair Hefner on Wednesday mentioned the issue of 6 PPD. This issue was something that rose from the ground up, from the local level to the national level, which highlights the importance of meetings like this and the partnerships that we have with our RTOCs and with the ground working on these issues day to day. Our priority at AIO, the American Indian Environmental Office, is our role in coordinating across the agency with other federal, state, and tribal partners regarding the threats posed by 6-PPD, which is a chemical used in virtually all tires as an anti-degradant. When 6-PPD breaks down, it results in a chemical called 6-PPD quinone. And some studies have shown that this chemical is toxic to coho salmon following exposure only of a few hours. The science on this issue is emerging, and more research is needed to determine the threats posed to other fish, including other types of salmon. Research is ongoing to explore safe and effective alternatives to 6-PPD. But even if 6-PPD were phased out today, tires would still be around for a long time, continuing to spread this chemical for many years. So scientists at EPA and elsewhere are actively exploring mitigation efforts that might be available to protect vulnerable waterways. My office is coordinating with Region 10, the Office of Research and Development, the Office of Water, tribal interests, and others to build up webinars that we conducted last year and understand, address, and communicate about issues like 6-PPD quinone, and to raise awareness and provide information about possible funding opportunities. Another top priority, which Jane, I think, talked about a little yesterday, was EPA's use and protection of indigenous knowledge, sometimes referred to as traditional ecological knowledge. EPA understands that IK is one of the many important bodies of knowledge that can contribute to the scientific and technical advancements of the United States and to our collective understanding of the natural world. Indigenous knowledge plays a crucial role in environmental protection by offering insights into sustainable practices, biodiversity conservation, and ecosystem management. Indigenous communities often possess generations of wisdom about living in harmony with nature, which can inform our modern conservation efforts. This includes practices like agroforestry, traditional land management techniques, and medicinal plant knowledge. Collaborating with tribes can lead to a more holistic and effective environmental policies and practices. EPA is committed to gaining awareness and understanding of Indigenous knowledge and the inclusion of and application of IK in federal research, federal policies, and federal decision-making. In support of that goal, EPA has been an active participant on the Subcommittee on Indigenous Knowledge within the White House's Office of Science and Technology. In December 22, with the help of EPA, the subcommittee released government-wide industrial Indigenous knowledge guidance. EPA responded by creating and deploying an EPA-wide IK training to educate our EPA staff what IK is and how it can be recognized, considered, and applied in federal research policy and decision-making at EPA. We've had 2 trainings already. They were both took place in February. We had about 1,000 people at EPA participate in those trainings, which is a significant amount. And we plan on doing 3 more of those trainings for EPA staff throughout the remainder of the year. But it's also recorded and available for EPA staff, EPA staff to access. So we have placed a great importance on incorporating Indigenous knowledge into our everyday work at EPA. I think is really exciting. Some of our other work includes working with our federal partners because we can't do it all alone, all by ourselves at EPA. Obviously, other federal agencies have interest in the work that we do in Indian country, especially within the environmental stewardship realm. So we're an active participant in the White House Council on Native American Affairs. As many of you know, the White House Council on Native American Affairs was started during the Obama administration in response to Executive Order 13647 in 2013. It went dormant for a little while. Something happened in between there. But the Biden-Harris administration did in fact reconvene the White House Council on Native American Affairs, and there are 6 committees within the White House Council, and EPA participates in 2. We participate in all of them, but we're co-lead on 2 of them, which is the Climate Change, Tribal Homelands and Treaties Committee, and we're also a co-lead with the Department of Interior and the Department of State on the International Indigenous Issues Committee within the White House Council. A 7th committee was just recently formed in December, which I'll talk about in a moment, but that committee focuses on the implementation of the Executive Order 14112 that was added at the Tribal Nations Conference. So I guess you're asking, why is all of this important? It's important because EPA's participation and leadership within the White House Council means that we can improve the coordination of federal programs and the use of available federal resources for the benefit of tribal communities. We can also ensure that we have a continual stream of meaningful deliverables, such as those associated with Executive Order 14112. As I mentioned last December, at the White House Tribal Nation Summit, the president did sign that executive order. I'll read it one more time because it's quite long. And it says, reforming federal funding and support for tribal nations to better embrace our trust responsibilities and promote the next era of tribal self-determination. It's a very long title, has a lot of words, and I will say it's very meaningful, I think, those words, and a very laudable goal for us to achieve. The executive order requires federal agencies to reform federal funding and set up support programs to make sure that they're more accessible, flexible, and equitable, and creates a process for the federal government to assess unmet federal funding needs consistent with our trust and treaty responsibilities to tribal nations. The White House Council is leading a government-wide effort approach to the implementation of this executive order. EPA is working closely with the White House Council to make sure that our implementation efforts are coordinated. We've also actually established within EPA, we have an internal work group led by my office, and it involves several offices across the agency, throughout EPA, including Region 10. So we've taken a lead on prioritizing that executive order's implementation. There are three groups that were established three federal working groups that have been established by the executive order, and EPA has a representative on each of those through three groups. I serve as the EPA representative on the implementation committee, while staff from the EPA's financial and grants offices serve on the budget task force and the federal funding task force reform committee. Excuse me. And so that's just some of the things that we're working on within the agency. But I did add a piece today to talk about something that's personally important to me, and that's Native representation. There are many ways in which we choose to serve our communities, and I chose this way to serve in the federal government. It's not always been easy, I'll tell you that. I moved to DC 20 years ago. I know you're like, how did he start working 20 years ago? Because he looks so young. But as Heather mentioned, I've worked for 4 different senators during that time, and each of those senators represented states with large populations of Native people. I worked for the Obama administration as a political appointee during the Obama administration. I worked for the Senate Committee on Indian Affairs, and I worked for the Senate Committee on Environment and Public Works. I mention this all to you because most of my career, I was the only Native person in the room. And my voice was the only Native voice where important decisions were being made. And I just think that we need more Native people in those conversations and in those rooms where those decisions are being made. So at EPA, for instance, more than 50% of our Indigenous employees are eligible to be eligible for retirement within the next 5 years. So that means we could lose half of our Native voice at EPA, which I think is so critical. So it's something that we're working on ways to reverse this trend. We're looking at trying to get Indian preference in hiring at EPA that they have at other agencies like HHS, like at the Department of the Interior. We don't have that authority at EPA, but we're trying to see how we can access getting Indian preference in hiring. That will help us. We're also working with the American Indian Higher Education Consortium to create a pipeline to create a pathway for Native students if they want to choose a career at EPA. But I do believe wholeheartedly that we need to increase our tribal perspectives within all levels of the federal government and the state government and local governments, because our perspective is so often overlooked and so often misunderstood. So I make this plug today. I don't know, I'm willing to listen to any ideas that anyone has because it's so important to me. Like I said, I've been doing this for 20 years. I don't know how much longer I'll be able to do it. But it's exhausting. But I do want to make sure that we're opening the door for the next generation of tribal leaders to come in and kind of fill the shoes that, that these important positions that are held by Native Americans and have that voice. It's been so fulfilling to me personally to serve in all of these roles that I have. And I want to ensure that we're continuing to make sure that that Native perspective, that Native voice is in the room. So with that, I've kind of outlined some top priorities for us, what we're working on at the EPA. Obviously, that's just a snapshot. We're doing a lot of things behind the scenes. There's a lot of things that we've gotten done. We heard about the water rights rule yesterday, which is a huge deal. I'm very excited that we're able to make that announcement here. There are still some things that we're working on, baseline. There's just a lot going on. It's not all been easy. We've made some major strides in some areas. We've got a long way to go in others. We've made a couple of missteps, but here we are. We're having conversations about it. And I just can't thank you all enough for your friendship and your partnership as we make these decisions together and do the best that we can to improve environmental stewardship and the protection of the environment and public health in Indian country. So thank you all for that. I'll wrap up there and I'll be around. I don't know if there's time for questions, Randy. Did I go over? Am I still talking? I've got 10 minutes. I can ask questions. I'm happy to do so if anyone has any. Or not.
Anyone have questions for Kenneth?
Thank you. I hear you mentioned executive orders for creating task forces. The federal task force are created from different organizations in the federal government. Sometimes they don't realize what we're going through, so I would recommend that the tribes are part of this, either through advisory level or in the capacity to provide assistance to the task force. So I didn't know if you mentioned that earlier.
I didn't specifically mention that, but you're incredibly right. We do need more representation in all of these task force and advisory bodies, and there always should be that tribal and Native perspective. And we should also be helping to do what we can to provide capacity building and resources to ensure that that voice is amplified.
Any other questions for Kenneth or comments? Bill?
Thank you, Kenneth, for the extension news on the possibility of the Federal Advisory Committee Act. I don't really have a question. I mean, you have talked at length on it. I just wanted to recommend to my colleagues and folks in the room to really look into that process, make sure you're aware of how the Federal Advisory Committee Act works, and so you can participate in this extended 120-day consultation. That's an important issue, and I think all the tribes need to research that and do the best they can to make an informed decision and help Kenneth make an informed decision.
Yeah,
Thank
I'll
you.
just add on to that. Please do submit comments through the regular process, but we also are offering individual consultations for tribes if they would like to engage themselves that way. We just ask that we do it about a month before the end of the consultation period, so we have time to schedule it before the expiration of the time. So.
And I just wanted to add on to your comment and announcement about extension of the time frame and why that's important to us in our region. We mentioned this morning, we have 47% of the nation's tribes. Our RTOC's task is to do outreach in important issues like this when we have opportunities for our tribes and our tribal councils to do government-to-government consultation or to present a comment letter on these types of proposed rulemakings or changes that you spoke about. So what we do in our region is because we're spread throughout such a vast area, we hold town hall meetings. And if you can only imagine, coordinating 271 tribes is very, very time consuming. And anyhow, I just wanted to make an announcement that because we've been planning this event for many months, we haven't had a town hall meeting in a while. But we are planning one to happen later this summer. And because of that extension, we are able to actually take a breath and breathe from this and give our tribes enough time to make this a scheduled meeting. So thank you so much for listening to that and for extending that time frame for us.
And Randy, please know that I will never, I'll never shy away from having a discussion or a conversation about anything that we're doing at EPA. So if it's something you feel appropriate for me to attend, I definitely offer myself.
Yeah, our town hall meetings are closed to outside of our own tribes
Sure.
because we want to create that. That's a great point, though. We will take you up on that if our tribal caucus sees fit, for sure. That's a wonderful invitation or offer for you. But just so everyone here knows too, if you've never attended one of our town hall meetings, they're only for our tribes. And so it's our tribal caucus, not our EPA caucus, and it's only our tribes. So you have a very safe atmosphere to share any of your concerns. And it's specially designed that way, so. Well, of course, you fit both sometimes, so. And we had a senior tribal policy advisor position in our region who also was able to sit in both the EPAs as well as the tribal caucus meetings. And that was a great position that's actually currently been dissolved, so.
No, I'm sorry. Just to add on to that though, too, I'm hoping that's something that we can get back in Region 10 as that senior tribal policy advisor. And it's not to take anything away from Casey because Casey's Indigenous. Many of you guys at the EPA are stretched thin. And being stretched thin limits the amount of capacity that is outreach to the tribes. And we're hoping that we could just get that back, because that was a very valuable position in a lot of ways. And I know in the reorganization structure, it may not be the same. Senior tribal policy advisor, but we need to ensure that it's a tribal person that comes back in that position at some point in time.
I have just enough information to be dangerous, so I won't say anything on it. But I will defer to, I think Dana is going to be talking later. Our friend and the Deputy Regional Administrator, Dan Opolsky, will be speaking later today, and he might have more information than I do, so I won't comment.
Awesome, thank you. And, oh, great, thank you.
Thank you. Briefly, thank you, Ken. I appreciate that, like has been said, the extension. My name is Russ Hepfer, and I'm from Lower Elwha Clallam Tribe, Vice Chairman. I'm also on RTOC and NTOC. And again, thanks for the extension, very important. Trying to change the dynamics of membership on the NTC. I wanted to give, we're trying to, with the town halls, we're trying to get what we do at RTOC out to the tribes. And I want to use 6 PPD as an example, and thank you, Ken. It came, I'm not a scientist, I'm a fisherman. Most of my life, I started commercially fishing at 11. I know nothing about 6 PPD or tire dust. I know it kills our fish, and now our trout, and maybe steelhead too. So, but it came from a tribe in Puget Sound, Salish Sea. They brought it to the National Tribal Toxics Council, which I'm a part of. And then I brought it to RTOC, and they say, what's that? And so I had to kind of find out and tell them a little bit about it. But I actually got to talk to Michael Regan, the administrator of EPA, through this process, face to face. And pardon the pun, but it gained traction, and I think it was in large part to this group. So it's very important. I also wanted to encourage you to participate in the town hall meetings. It's only an hour and a half, and you don't have to stick around the whole time. But if you have issues, it's a good place to bring it. And I wanted to take this opportunity to thank our staff for this 3 days of conferencing. It's really hard to throw one. I've been involved in things like this, and it's a lot of hard work, so thank you.
It's our pleasure to serve. I did have a suggestion. I was thinking about your education pipeline request, and I wonder if that's something that the TACs could potentially handle, as it's almost an environmental justice issue, that lack of representation of Indigenous people who work at the federal EPA. And it's, you know, probably up for debate whether or not that qualifies, but in my opinion, it sort of does. If the often people may be sitting in this audience, including myself, thinking, oh man, you know, that would be a hard job, but I think I have the fortitude to do this. I think I can carry my Indigenous voice to the government. But then you have to go through the application process, and you have to jump through all these hoops. And that process is really difficult for many of us to navigate. So just keeping that in mind, the roadblocks and barriers to actually getting your name in the hat. So
As part of our work with the TCUs, we're developing a webinar series on how to apply for a federal job, because it's not the easiest. I mean, it's actually pretty difficult. And as I mentioned during my talk, I think having tools like Indian preference in hiring will help us. Having those webinars so people do know how to apply for jobs, but even knowing where to look for those jobs is sometimes a challenge.
Exactly,
And then jumping through all of the hoops, and it takes 120 days or whatever to get a job. It's quite an extensive process. And you know, we're trying to figure out ways with which we can reduce those burdens, because again, I can't, you know, I can't tell you how many times I've been the only Indian in the room. And, you know, we're lucky at EPA because we have Native people in senior leadership. We're so lucky to have Casey here in Region 10, and just have that regional leadership and having that Native perspective. But it just doesn't stop there. Having it throughout the federal agency, throughout all of our programs, throughout our Office of Research and Development, water, wherever, just having that Indigenous perspective is so critically important to all of the work that we do, and especially when it comes to Indian country.
Yeah.
So we have to figure it out.
yeah, and it's a hard job, but I did have one other suggestion for that too, is that the pipeline, it starts early. It starts at elementary school sometimes. And I know that there's not quite often that much funding that goes into supporting youth programs at the EPA. So maybe increasing the amount of funding that's given to building those workforce development pipelines specifically for Indigenous people would be an idea as well.
That's a great idea, and I would welcome any suggestions on how we do it.
I'm here all day.
Okay, that's great. But yeah, environmental work is so Indigenous. I think creating that pipeline from a young age is something that should be easy for us to do. So we'll take that to consideration and think about how we can do that, because you're right. Getting younger people involved is just always the best way. So.
Thank you so much.
Yeah. See, you're right. Like when I was,
Yeah,
20 years
you were
old.
in elementary school 20 years ago, right? Well, thank you so much, Ken. I appreciate you
Thank you.
being
And
here.
I'll be around. So if anyone has any questions that they did want to ask today in front of everyone, I'm happy to talk while we're here. So thank you.